Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Here he is. All right. Hey, welcome everybody. How you doing? Good morning. It is Monday, July 12th, 2021. Time for another show. These things keep happening, and so far nothing I can think of to stop them. Though I will put a stop to it very shortly. I think in about 3 weeks. Reminder that I have the big getaway coming up, and still haven't really decided exactly how we're going to handle that break. Lots of suggestions being tossed about. But the first time I think we'll be away for such an extended period without a large number of pre-recorded shows, but we may be able to break into that. I've been thinking about a lot of different approaches to how we handle it, but all of them are stressing me out. So, we'll figure something out as we go along. Anyway, today should be no problem. Greg's working already on hand, well, not on hand in terms of being connected via Skype, but on hand with his raft of stories as usual. And Justice gives us the thumbs up, says everything is A-OK, noting for us in passing that I guess the big soccer tournament over in Europe is, or I guess they're having them all over the place. Are these qualifiers for World Cup, or are these qualifiers for the Olympics? I don't, or are they just regular every couple of years? I don't know. I don't follow it enough. But I know this, everywhere I went, it was on the TV, so I'm aware that it happened. England and Italy yesterday in the Euro finals and overtime and all of that exciting stuff, and I guess Italy wins. There you go. In case you had TiVo'd it, there's no chance of that. Anybody who was interested enough to TiVo it hasn't found out who won already, but that's the notes. And what can I tell you? When I'm given notes, 99 times out of 100 I ignore them. But today I'm reading them. I actually tried to watch. I watched like the last 10 minutes of regulation time because I don't know. I think I was looking in on Twitter, and whenever something that big is going on Twitter, a good percentage of people that I follow are watching it and tweeting things that only make sense if you're also watching. So I figured out what it was, and since it was a final, last 10 minutes of a final, I can stand to watch that. Turn it on. It was 1-1, exciting. That meant, practically speaking, that meant everybody was exhausted, and so they ran around basically trying to run off all the rest of the time and then take a shot. And if it goes in, great. Otherwise, we're basically playing for some rest and some overtime, which is largely how we operate here on the show as well. I come in, I see that there's 2 hours to go. I know Greg is coming. I figure we kick the ball around a little bit back and forth, send it back to the goalie every once in a while to really pound it forward, and then he comes on and we wait for the end of the hour. Last week that didn't work all that well, or depending on how you look at it, worked great because Greg went all the way through the hour and then went through the top of the hour and into the next hour. So it's fantastic. So we just kick the ball around a little bit in the backfield for a while and wait for things to develop. Lots to catch up on, of course. Not hardly any of it to do with soccer. I want to thank some of the folks who sent me some background information on what's going on in Haiti, although we still are at a loss. I'm still at a loss in terms of the political situation necessarily, but lots of details, of course, about who the hell tried to, showed up to assassinate the president of Haiti in the middle of all this. And some surprising and weird answers. And I guess we should have known we were in for it when at the end of last week we were reading things that indicated that people were the attackers and it wasn't the president's official residence either. It was, I guess, his private residence where he was staying at the time, showed up and are shouting that they were American DEA agents. Something weird going on here. Plenty of other things, though, to catch up on as well. The coronavirus pandemic still with us. That'll be a major part of what Greg has prepared for you. No surprise there. I think we've informed you of where the virus is surging, why the virus is surging, where it's surging. And guess what? It's all following a more or less predictable scientific path because that's what we're dealing with. Also over the weekend, a potential disaster averted, but now some debate arising over what was the potential disaster exactly. And you never know as long as it remains potential. But 4 people arrested in Denver, where the All-Star game, the baseball All-Star game, was being held, about which I know nothing. So how about that? It was overshadowed entirely by the soccer. Did it even happen? It usually goes on over the weekend, I think, right? I don't know. Who knows? I don't watch this stuff anymore. And at any rate, 4 people arrested at a hotel in Vegas. Allegedly, well, what we do know is that there was a large number of rifles seized, a large amount of ammunition and body armor and all sorts of things that make you worried whenever you find them in mass quantities. And the initial thesis here was that the police had broken up what they thought might become a Las Vegas-style shooting, by which I think they mean at the music festival when the guy a couple of years ago shot out of the hotel room window at the Mandalay Bay Hotel and Casino, in case you were thinking it was just a hotel. It's not. But they arrested these people, although I will say that there's another theory circulating that says this looks more like drug dealing, but with lots of weapons, than it does a plot to carry off some sort of mass casualty event. So lots of questions hovering over that one. But in any case, I guess really pretty much any time you see people hanging out in hotel rooms with something like 16, I think they said, rifles and 1,000 rounds of ammunition plus body armor, you'd like to know what's going on. So I'm glad that they rounded them up. And perhaps we can dive into the Denver Post reporting on that one, plus check around for the alternative theories and see what we're looking at. Here comes Greg. Good timing now. We can bring him in and sort through the raft of stories. That is, if he can settle down after the very exciting European soccer finals or whatever it was. I don't know. Did you see any of that, Greg? Good morning.
No, I didn't, as a matter of fact,
okay.
And I'm not going to watch the All-Star game, which is tomorrow night.
Okay, thank you for...
But I do know when they're on.
Yeah, that's step one. Believe me, this whole morning has been about things that I'm like, what's happening in this area of the world? There's a lot of people interested in this. Don't know what's happening in the soccer. Don't know what's happening in the baseball. This morning, Pocket suggested some story about pop music that named, 2 very important figures in music that I had no idea who they were or what was going on. I felt like I had to sit down and but I sat and I read it a little bit. I'm a little behind on these things, but a couple of them have erupted into assassinations. So I'm trying to catch up. Jeez.
Well, we'd like that not to happen.
Yeah,
and frankly, I don't really know whether it was a planned mass assassination or whether it was a drug deal, but that seems like an awful lot of bullets and an awful lot of guns.
Like I'd rather
And
not
the
have
reason
that.
it came to people's attention is because one of those essential worker housekeepers said, gee, this is weird. Let me just report this.
Yeah, this seems like an odd thing to have in this hotel. Also, I was struck, I don't know, it was at the Maven Hotel in Denver, and I don't even know what that is. Usually you hear, I'm used to these chain hotels or something famous. I don't know. Is the Maven Hotel a famous place? I have no idea.
I don't know.
Maybe it's beyond my price range. That could be. Who knows?
Maybe. It's part of the
I
men's
guess I'll look
chain.
it up. But now we're learning things. There's a Maven Hotel there, but I've never run into one yet. Okay.
Well, I'm just glad nothing happened.
Yes.
Now, things that did happen, which is kind of a slow burn, and of course is the intersection between science and politics, is the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. You may have heard of it.
That's
It's still going on.
Right. What? No.
Oh, yeah. So a couple of issues here. Firstly, Eric Topol, who is a noted scientist and doc who's got a great Twitter feed to follow, points out that the Delta hit to the U.S. is now extending from cases, where we measure what's going on here, and the Delta variant itself is over 50% in the U.S., so it's becoming the dominant strain, as predicted. But it's extending from cases, and as you know from following this for a year, hospitalizations lag cases, deaths lag hospitalizations. Hospitalizations are now rising. 13 states have an greater than 65% Delta prevalence right now, and with more than 25% increase of hospitalizations over the past 2 weeks. And the states that are leading in terms of increased hospitalizations are some states that actually had been in previously decent control, including Nevada, which is up 78% in terms of the hospitalizations. The worry about Nevada is that what happens in Las Vegas may not stay in Las Vegas.
Oh.
And
Yeah,
so things
like
may
shootings.
move, and you're getting people from all over the country who are mixing and matching. And that's kind of worrisome. Alaska, the total number of cases there is small, but the percentage rise is big.
Okay.
And places like Arkansas and Nebraska, Mississippi, Utah, Florida, Missouri, Louisiana, South Dakota, these are all 30% or more in terms of increased hospitalizations. We don't expect that it's going to be bad like last year, but we do expect that it's going to be worse than what we're looking at right now. And there are places, for example, like Missouri, which really is running into trouble. There's a piece on kansascity.com, like we're on an island, how Missouri's inaction allowed Delta variant to spread, and talks about the fact that, just a couple of weeks ago, the epidemiologist Jessica Pearson with the Missouri Department of Health was sending business as usual emails to local health officials in the northwest corner of the state saying, there's a reminder, nothing additional needs to be done, but we emphasize the importance of a timely investigation and implementation of control measures for the variant cases. And a month later, Missouri's in crisis. So Delta's rampaging through the unvaccinated, spurring rising cases, threatening to overwhelm Springfield hospitals. Springfield, Missouri, that is.
You're right.
Missouri has the
Shelbyville,
second highest
though.
rate in new cases per capita and among the lowest adult vaccination rates in the state. And if you ask what went wrong, it's basically,
That.
complacency.
Yeah, or last week. Yeah, right. We heard it last week. People just saying, we don't have that here.
Yeah, or that's not a problem. Or and my favorite is, this is all COVID porn. You guys are just pushing this because you want people to be scared. People should just rip their masks off and just go back to normal. Well, you can do that if you live in a place like I do in Connecticut, where the rates of infection are relatively low and COVID cases are low, and Delta isn't necessarily swarming us
Vaccination
yet.
is high.
But it's rising, and everything is rising, and so one does have to be careful. And the idea that you don't have to pay attention to it is ridiculous.
Yes.
And the reason people are saying that, besides the fact that they
It's
just
not the
like to
All-Star
be
game.
nasty, and also, if you've read a newspaper story, suddenly you're an expert in epidemiology. The other reason they're saying it is they psychologically don't want this to be a problem. And so, as you know, if you have a problem early on where you could intervene and try to make it and mitigate it so that it's not as bad, the best and smartest thing to do is yell at people trying to bring this to your attention. You probably didn't know that, but if you stay on
hadn't thought
Twitter,
about
you
that,
learn
but
that that's
maybe I
quickly the best way to try to prevent a problem.
All right. Well, I'll start thinking about somebody to yell at, and I'll work on it. I don't want to go into this unprepared.
Right, exactly. So we have examples of that, of course, from politics. Kristi Noem was at the second CPAC. Nobody seems to know why there's a second CPAC.
Oh, yes. Right. I did see that asked today, and no one knows.
Nobody knows because they already had CPAC, but
because.
they had CPAC again.
Usually in the winter.
And Kristi Noem criticizes GOP governors who enacted COVID-19 mandates while accusing some of rewriting their history. We should have opened up. I opened up. You should be like me. Put me on the ticket.
Okay. I mean,
Donald.
right. State is, there's no reason in the world why COVID should have been prevalent there, but it's one of the top 10 most infected states.
Right, and they're a
Per
rural
capita.
state. They have everything going for them. They don't have,
Far away
large
from
collections
travel
of
ports.
people except when they plan it.
Right. And I guess they're planning another one. Just like CPAC, they're going to have two. There'll be a second Sturgis. I mean,
Right.
that's an
Even
annual
when
thing.
cases surged in her state last November, Noem refused to mandate masks and chose not to put in the precautionary measures that many other governors were taking, and insisted that her state had been most effective by swiftly identifying and isolating cases. The
They
idea
didn't do any of that.
of case tracing and case prevention is terrific if you have a small number, but they didn't have a small number, nor did they actually do that. She
Right.
just claims she did that because she's a Trumper.
Yeah, well.
As of this weekend, South Dakota had 230 deaths per 100,000 people, according to Johns Hopkins ranking. the state 10th in that metric. And the state had 14,000 cases per 100,000 people, ranking South Dakota with the third highest.
Yeah.
14,090 if you want to be precise. But the idea that they somehow skipped everything is ridiculous because it's not true. I mean, she's basically flat out lying.
Yeah, she's just basically out there saying, I'm still alive, and so the state's not decimated by the virus, so there you go. Except, several thousand people were severely sickened and died, and she just doesn't care.
Right.
The fact that the state's still there
the
is
other
enough for her.
Group that doesn't care, besides Republican governors, because we had, for example, in Missouri, Governor Parson inviting the Biden administration to come help with their anti-vax program because not enough people are vaccinated. And as soon as they came, then Parson started yelling at them for actually trying.
Oh, yes.
This happened.
Oh, that's the new
and nobody could
hotness.
figure out what the heck he was doing. He invited them there, and when they got there and said, we really need to go door to door, not to give people vaxes when they open the door,
thing.
but to give them information. Oh,
Yeah.
we can't have that. That's personal responsibility. Well, yeah.
Yeah, it's the most small town America program you can imagine. It's neighbors knocking on neighbors' doors and saying,
Right, exactly.
"So what's up with you and vaccine? Do you want one? I'll tell you where to get one if you want one."
Or if you want information, we'll provide it.
Socialism. Yeah, right. I mean, it was the biggest thing at CPAC over the weekend. Was I'll shoot anyone who comes to my door and asks if I want vaccine. I don't want it. That's why my door's closed.
Yeah, and if I happen to
it's a
travel to
door,
the Maven
so-
Hotel, I'll make sure you don't come and ask me.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
That's probably
You
what the
can
whole
believe
thing was about,
That's
right?
it. Yes, right. Body
Well,
armor.
I'm from Missouri. We have to do this. This
the
is how
thing
we
to
all
do.
live.
I think there's only one Maven Hotel, by the way. Although, now that it's in the news, you type in Maven Hotel, it brings you to that one. But I
mean, it's not part of the mensch chain? I was wrong.
I don't know. I got no idea. I can't connect it to any kind of a chain. We don't have. I can't even comprehend something that's not a chain anymore.
Well, more information coming in terms of what was going on there. But I do have to point out that there's a major group and network, in addition to governors, that's trying to stop you from getting vaccinated, and that organization is called Fox News.
That's right.
And in fact, there's a big story about that today
All right.
in the New York Times. Despite outbreaks among unvaccinated, Fox News hosts smear shots months after Rupert Murdoch, Rudock, as we call him, got a COVID-19 dose. One of his network stars, Tucker Carlson, who's probably vaccinated and just lying about it, called the Biden vaccination proposal the greatest scandal in my lifetime. In fact, somebody pointed out that at Fox News, you're sort of required to be vaccinated if you want to show up on set. And so all these people coming and joining together, railing about vaccines, are probably all vaccinated. They're just lying to you. But,
yes, I suspect that's the case with a lot of people railing about those things, even in Congress.
Mr. Carlson, Ms. Ingram, and guests on their programs have said on the air that vaccines could be dangerous, that people are justified in refusing them, that public authorities have overstepped in their attempt to deliver them. And they last week criticized a plan by the Biden administration to increase vaccinations by having healthcare workers and volunteers go door to door to try to persuade people. Going door to door, that's creepy stuff,
Yeah, that's the
And
basic approach.
Marjorie Taylor Greene used terms like brown shirts and Nazis.
Yes, right.
It's all part and parcel of I don't know why they're doing this.
Yeah, I don't know. That just seems to be what has played with the base so far.
Well, yeah, but then again, they're also pushing insurrection.
Yeah, right. That's true. Nobody seems to be concerned about that. They love to
Tucker
threaten
Carlson
people
is,
coming to door to
there's a
door.
story here from CNN. He's furious at Fox executives for not vigorously defending him amid his claims that the NSA spied on him. And what he contends is a giant conspiracy to destroy his TV show.
Didn't need any help with that conspiracy, but all right.
Right. Okay. Well, if he says so.
Yeah, we got.
But I think that if you want to put this in context,
I do not.
okay. Well, then I'll just hang up now.
All right. No, wait a second.
I'm going to
This
take my
is
ball and go home if you don't want to.
backfiring on me entirely. Yeah, please put it in context
that's
for the
what you
next
meant to
hour.
say, right? I just spelled it wrong. I meant to say yes. I just accidentally said
I was
no.
just being contrarian, and it didn't work out for me. All right.
So this is a political scientist, Liliana Mason, and she was interviewed on NPR. Very fascinating interview here. Okay. And the title of the piece is Study Looks at What Motivates Trump Supporters.
Oh, boy. All right.
Well, it's easy. I mean, you want the abbreviated printout review, it's hate.
Okay, yeah, it used to be economic anxiety. I'm making a little quote.
Economic insecurity, right?
Anxiety, yes, right.
Anxiety. The study's called Activating Animus, the uniquely social roots of Trump support. And basically, they had access to specific people back in 2011 with the data set, and we're comparing it then to now. And what she says is we were interested in identifying the people who ultimately would like Donald Trump, but finding them before Trump existed on the political scene. So they have access to this data set that starts in 2011, and they interviewed the same people in 2011 and again multiple years after that. So it's the same people. So they can see how they changed. And so that way, she says, we can look at the characteristics of people in 2011 before Trump came around and use that to predict how they feel about Trump in 2018, after he'd been president for 2 years.
All right. Yeah.
So the colloquial stories we hear about Trump suggest that he somehow created a whole bunch of hatred in American politics. And we're talking about Fox News, for example. They spew hate every night, and people watch them. Therefore, the people who watch them are becoming haters.
All right.
Or you could do that in a larger scale with Trump. But instead, what this data shows is what he did was serve as a place where people who already held a lot of animus toward marginalized groups sort of gather around him. So this was a latent faction of Americans that had just already been sitting there and had already existed. So it's not necessarily that it's the Republican Party creating animus towards people. It's that there's this faction of Americans who really dislike marginalized groups, and they're attracted to one party or the other based on the sort of the decisions of that party, otherwise known as swing voters.
Yeah.
And they're able to kind of hide within the party in order to make American politics be focused more on the party and not on the faction of people who are feeling a lot of hatred toward marginalized outgroups. And we sort of knew this, by the way, because you could step back and during the whole 4 years and in the run-up to the election and in the midterms during the Trump era, we were talking about the fact that there's people out there who really are like nasty, bad people, but don't normally vote. And then they got really excited about voting for this one guy, but they're not necessarily Republicans. So if you ask them, well, do you feel more committed to Trump or to the Republican Party? And most of them would say Trump. And that meant that, okay, well, we're analyzing it from the point of view of that means that if Trump's not on the ticket, you're likely not to vote. Which is probably not true, because so long as the Republican Party represents the hate that they want to feel and to administer on everybody else, they'll still vote for them.
Yeah, I guess how the Trumpier the party becomes, the more interested they are in continuing to vote.
And the weird thing is that this is not one of those both sides. There's no such phenomenon on the Democratic side. When we look at the Democratic Party, Professor Mason says, we looked at people's feelings toward whites and Christians, the groups that are typically associated with the Republican Party. More on that after the break, probably. And what we found is that any hatred that people have in 2011 towards whites or Christians has no effect on their approval of the Democratic Party or of a number of Democratic Party officials. So that relationship doesn't exist on the Democratic side. There isn't a sort of an anti-white racism that's driving Democrats the way there's an anti-black racism driving Trump support. There isn't an equivalent figure on the Democratic side. And in fact, Trump himself is unique on the right.
Yeah, well, I think that's certainly true, too. And yeah, I mean, asking around or just being around, you never get the sense that people are like, well, I can't admit it out loud, but but you'll just never read this off of me. I'm here because I'm so mad about white Christians. So I just don't run into that.
Yeah, and so what happens here is there's an empowerment in the hate groups because they've taken control of basically the entire Republican Party, not because all Republicans agree with them. Well, not all Republicans are like, what does it matter? Because Republicans fear the voters that agree with them.
Yeah.
And so they fear the voters that don't agree with them if they happen to be not haters. And so they will act as if everybody in the Republican Party agrees with them. They'll continue to vote for Republicans. And so it's a distinction without a difference. And Professor Mason goes on to say we've all been kind of hampered, not you and me, David, because we talk about this all the time. We've been kind of hampered in talking honestly about what we're seeing because it's about partisanship and it's about polarization, which suggests, both Democrats and Republicans are equally extreme. Or somebody will pull up a study and say, look, compared to where we were 5 years ago, Democrats have moved more left than Republicans have moved right. That's because where we were 5 years ago was terrible in terms of a lot of the places we were at. Duh.
I guess that would explain
If Democrats had become less racist, it's because 5 years ago racism was the norm, for example. Well, that's critical race theory. No, it's just looking at where we were at and specific issues. But Professor Mason goes on to say, if instead we focus on the sort of sub-faction of Americans, which is not even close to a majority, it's a lot easier for us to talk about politics in a way that says, Biden could say, yes, I want to cooperate, but I want to have cooperation with responsible opposition, not with people who are acting on behalf of hatred of marginalized groups. Or he could say, I want to cooperate, but not with people who support the insurrection. I just added that one, but it's the same concept here. I want to cooperate, but only with people who are decent people.
Yes.
I want to cooperate, but not with haters. You could say it any way you want to. It comes down to the same thing. There's a faction within the Republican Party who wasn't necessarily a Republican Party faction 6 years ago, who now are because of Trump, and now want to keep the Republican Party hating. And so it becomes very difficult to cooperate with them. And that's how come there's a January 6th committee,
as opposed to
saying this slowly in my mind so I get it right, rather than a January 6th commission. That is to say, it was impossible to get bipartisan agreement because one side is part of the insurrection.
Yes, and even those who, as you were saying, aren't necessarily in agreement are afraid to not appear to be in agreement. It's the Mitch McConnell syndrome. He comes out and says who's responsible for this thing, and then when it comes time to hold them responsible, they say, well, if I do that, people will be mad at me and try to replace me in a primary, and I don't want that to happen. So I will use all my power to give them whatever they want so that I can continue to hold that power, even though it's of no use to me anymore. All right, 2 minutes and we'll be back.
Hi everyone, it's me, Gil, minimal contributor to content but regular contributor to funding for Kagro in the morning. Let's change things up from David's so very tired plea for your contributions with a plea of my own. If you want to add your voice to the show, do it. Record your own segment using your favorite recording device and send it to David. Read an article and give your opinion. Write your own essay and read that. The sky's the limit. Well, not really. Try to keep it relatively short so David doesn't have to stress about cutting it and hurting your feelings. Join the hallowed ranks of Greg Dworkin and Joan McCarter and be part of this somewhat witty deep dive into political topics with unnecessary censoring. Lend your voice to the show by sending it to kagrox@gmail.com. KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue. This is the fabled part after the 2-minute break where we revisit things that we referenced earlier and expand on them.
Yeah,
or
in theory.
There was something.
In practice, I have to tell you, this is probably going to be a shorter segment than normal. It's not to make up for when I did a longer segment than normal the other day.
I don't keep.
And I just kept talking, but it's just once you start talking over David, you sort of get used to it, and you go with the roll.
I get used to it. I stop. I said, "This is great."
Well, right. I don't stop. But one of the things that I wanted to point out is that the whole issue of what has happened to the Republican Party cannot be looked at and cannot be analyzed without looking at the Christian nationalist movement and the Christian right.
All right.
And so the Washington Post has a fascinating and chilling story, which is entitled "An American Kingdom. A new and rapidly growing Christian movement is openly political, wants a nation under God's authority, and is central to Donald Trump's GOP." And we were talking over the break about, what's happening in Texas. One thing that's happening in Texas is that they have a special session to revisit the idea of restricting voting rights, although not quite as extreme as what got rejected. And it was rejected because the Democrats walked out. But they're going to revisit it and probably push something through. And at the same time in Texas, one of the things that they've done, and it's interesting, Greg Abbott is pushing the idea of criminalizing abortion to the point of recruiting citizens.
Yeah.
to track whether or not you're involved in abortion in any way, shape, or form, driving somebody or involving somebody, and then criminalizing it and allowing them to, I don't know what, arrest you,
well,
citizens
among
arrest or
other
something.
things, you can. I don't know exactly
Report
how
you.
you enforce it, but yeah, if you find somebody that's been involved in an abortion that it was, I guess, what they would now categorize as illegal, which includes everything after 6 weeks, then I don't know if you press the case, I guess, or provide information that leads to conviction. I don't know. Sometimes they state it that way. But this is a very odd thing. But it deputizes people, even outside of Texas, to pursue and press these cases and, I guess, turn evidence into police or whatever. And you get $10,000 reward, essentially, if you turn somebody in for having an abortion at 6 weeks in one day. Should be awesome.
This is a story in the Washington Post.
How are we going to pay for that, by the way? I'm just wondering.
I don't know. A Washington Post out of Fort Worth, and talks about a church called Mercy Culture, part of a growing Christian movement that's non-denominational, openly political, and has become an engine of former President Trump's Republican Party. It includes some of the largest congregations in the nation, housed in the husks of old Baptist churches, former big box stores, and sprawling multi-million-dollar buildings with private security to direct traffic on Sundays. Its most successful leaders are considered apostles and prophets, including some with followings in the hundreds of thousands, publishing empires, TV shows, prayer networks, podcasts, spiritual academies, and branding in the form of T-shirts, bumper stickers, and flags. It's a world in which demons are real, miracles are real, and the ultimate mission is not just transforming individual lives, but turning civilization into their version of God's kingdom. One with two genders, no abortion, free market economy, Bible-based education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Free market. Yeah.
And so we were talking last week about the fact that the non-denominations are increasing in number as self-styled evangelicals are dropping, but it's not really clear what that means, because evangelical these days isn't a religious connotation or label, it's a political one. And this talks about that.
One. Yeah.
And even as mainline Protestant and evangelical denominations continue an overall decline, non-denominational congregations have surged. Experts seeking a more historical understanding point to a relatively recent development called NAR, or New Apostolic Reformation.
All right.
California-based theologian coined the phrase in the 1990s, and none of this is new, but strangely the thinking formed the basis of the Christian right in the 70s and have fueled GOP for decades. And we've pointed out, we used to call it the religious right. What is new, and this is Jerry Falwell Sr. stuff, Ralph Freed, what is new is the degree to which Trump elevated a fresh network of NAR-style leaders who in turn elevated him as God's chosen president, a fusion that has secured the movement as a grassroots force within the GOP, just as the old Christian right is waning increasingly. This is the world that the term evangelical voter refers to, not white-haired Southern Baptists in wooden pews, but the comparatively younger, more diverse, more extreme world of millions drawn to leaders who believe they're igniting a new great awakening in America, one whose epicenter is Texas. That's the context in which you get that new Texas law, and that's the context in which you get the Texas voter rights bills coming out with suppressing voters' rights.
I'll also point out the use of the term Great Awakening I don't think is an accident either, and that is also a big QAnon trigger phrase.
Interestingly enough,
a big overlap. Yeah.
Another article in Politico that I had set aside to talk about is called Trump World Wants to Distance from QAnon Even as the Ex-President Winks at It. Trump isn't disavowing the conspiracy, but his team doesn't want the association. So QAnon has infiltrated a lot of these non-denominational evangelical churches. In fact, there were articles a couple of weeks ago about the pastors complaining about it because they were losing control of their agenda, which is, making themselves rich.
Don't bring demons in there with them.
Yeah, it's the prosperity gospel. But, the QAnon stuff isn't far from the surface, and so it's all mixed together. And then when you turn around and say, well, why can't Joe Biden negotiate with these folks? The answer is because they're either Q or they're Christian dominionists.
Right, or both.
And so either way, no, you can't negotiate.
I do think that they're doing a lot of cover for Q and vice versa, and I think a lot of people who are into a lot of the Q stuff don't even know it, and they think they're, speaking about religious issues and biblical issues, and they don't even realize what they're involved in. That's, I think, it's the biggest success of transitioning Q from what it was to what it's become, is giving people, I guess, infecting people with the belief that there are demonic, satanic, pedophile cannibals out there for reasons independent of reading particular Chan-related websites, and instead getting that kind of crazy information either from their church or their multi-level marketing vitamin supplement program or what have you. Very weird and very troubling.
It's very
already.
troubling.
Yes.
So with that troubling sort of stuff, I thought I'd leave that with you and, talk about the fact that there's this going on within the Republican Party, and that's why, you can't possibly expect them to act rationally, and that's why there is a January 6th committee rather than a January 6th commission.
Right, and why there's no infrastructure bill yet.
Although there will be.
Yeah,
and in fact,
it just won't be
behind the scenes, Bernie Sanders is negotiating with a subcommittee chair, Joe Manchin, about what's in the reconciliation part. Mm-hmm. So a lot of this stuff is happening. And, there's been odd groups of people who have supported the bipartisan infrastructure stuff that's on the table, as well as a lot of behind-the-scenes negotiations going on with the reconciliation bill that's not on the table. Everybody understands that they're going to both happen. Republicans are committed to the idea of giving lip service to the idea that they won't, and they get upset when anybody tries to link them officially. But unofficially, everybody understands what's going on. And something will happen with the bipartisan infrastructure stuff, and then we'll see. We'll probably get the reconciliation infrastructure stuff, too. We'll just have to see what's in it. It's probably going to be half the size you would want. It's going to have half the stuff in it you would want. That's still a win.
All right. Well, hopefully it does happen, and nothing happens along the way, like Republicans become convinced that reconciliation is something akin to demonic possession, and therefore blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's still not supposed to be anything they can do to prevent it, but what we don't need is for West Virginians to start taking up the idea that there's something demonic about reconciliation, and therefore Joe Manchin changes his mind about the whole thing. But so far,
there's something demonic about coal-fired plants. Stick to that.
Well, yeah.
Fire, brimstone.
Fire, right. I mean,
sulfur.
Sure. All involved, isn't it?
It's all there. It's all there if only
curiously
you could see it.
Demonic.
And then the last piece, which isn't really a piece, I don't have anything to link to, but I suppose I could find something, is that our Connecticut Audubon Society has cautioned us that there appears to be a songbird illness, which is unspecified at this time, started in the Mid-Atlantic and D.C. area, and hasn't spread to Connecticut yet, but as a precaution, they're asking us to take all our bird feeders down for the time being until they figure out what's going on. Which is breaking my heart, but you got to do it to protect the birds.
Okay, yeah, I know that's a big thing.
So the public service announcement is check with your local Audubon Society and see if your state's affected.
Right.
Indiana and the Midwest are doing something about it. I'm not sure that Illinois is, and I don't know if it's moved west yet. They have their own issues with drought and stuff.
So that's sort of just a precautionary thing. Not sure if that's connected, but they want to keep birds
they don't
from
want birds
congregating
just in case it's infectious.
Close the seed markets, they say.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, well, that's interesting. I was going to bring up to you, but maybe we'll ponder it a little bit more Wednesday. I just happened to see last week an article saying that Connecticut hospitals in particular, and this is, are now requiring staff to get vaccinated against COVID in ways that I guess other states haven't jumped forward with yet.
Yeah, Ned Lamont's pretty good governor, and he's pretty proactive about a lot of this stuff. So. And I'm not hearing a lot of problems with it.
All right, well, that's good news. I mean, I guess if there's a mandate out there now, they must have had some discussion about it and said, we'll probably lose some people, but we'll be okay. And
Connecticut does have nurses unions, so my advice would have been, and nobody asked me, to go through the union and make sure everybody's on the same page about what's going on. That's what we did when we agreed with the unions to get flu shots done. It wasn't a mandate. It was just an understanding that it was a strong request, and if it didn't happen, other things might happen. But, you go talk to your people first. We're not going to make you. We're just going to suggest that, you come out strongly in support of it. And if the unions come out in strong support, it's much easier to get stuff done.
I guess so. Good. All right. Well, we'll follow that development, and I guess if he went windsurfing or whatever the hell it was that caused him trouble, if he went now, it would be okay. Now we have a record, and we're not worried about his establishing it. Okay.
Windsurfing. Oh, you're talking about Mark Zuckerberg and the flag during July 4th.
Yeah.
Right?
What was that thing? That's called something else, but I don't know.
It's an electric board of some kind. But somebody took that video and put it to the music of Ride of the Valkyries, which makes it much, much easier to watch.
I mean, it must be what he had in mind when he did that. I can't understand it in any other way. What's the flag doing there? You need to balance yourself.
Yeah, balance it with some Wagner.
Yeah, that helps.
That'll do it.
If you fall off of a board like that while holding a flag, is that a violation of, federal flag code or anything?
Well, if you hold on to the flag, you don't get wet.
I guess. That's right.
And somebody told him that.
I won't let you fall in.
I won't get wet.
And
I won't fall off.
The flag will float and keep you up. Okay. All right.
I want to
well,
know how many times
he
had to film that before he got it right.
That's true.
On the 782nd take.
The flag looked dry, but he's a billionaire. He could have had 100 flags stockpiled nearby, and give me a dry one for every take.
Right.
They can do anything.
Anyway, that's the story for today, at least for me. And I'll be back Wednesday, and we'll talk again.
All right. We'll do it that way, if you insist. Sounds good. Got to go take your bird feeder down.
Yep.
All right. Very good. Thanks, Greg. I appreciate it.
Take care.
Talk to you again soon. All right. And take care, birds.
Get your shot. And
birds, too.
I've sent David a lot of this stuff, but as it turns out, the J&J question as to whether or not you need a booster, still an open one. CDC says no. A lot of experts say yes. The good news is whatever you do, somebody's going to support it. So let's just leave it at that. Take care, and I'll talk to you Wednesday.
All right. Very good. We'll have an answer for you, I'm sure, by then. Definitively. Not really. All right. Thanks, Greg. I'm watching that closely. And it's interesting dynamics to try and figure that out, too. Like, normally, I guess you might think Johnson, I don't know. I guess my first thought was Johnson & Johnson would say, sure, you need a booster shot because then they could sell more doses. But it's not an open market situation, but they would sell them to the government. I don't know. I can't decide whether I think you'd be seeing them push it or not, but I think they're invested politically in making sure that everybody believes that their shot remains effective. So they're going to be, there's that too. There's a lot of politics involved in it, I am sure. And I am a little worried that we won't find out as soon as possible whether or not Johnson & Johnson's own experts or other experts watching the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and its effectiveness will jump in and admit that either a booster of J&J vaccine would be a good idea, or as the idea that's been floating around the last couple of weeks, mixing, I guess, the vaccines, getting a Johnson & Johnson shot and then later getting a booster of one shot of Pfizer. That kind of thing has been floated. And, with so much of the world having been vaccinated with either the Johnson & Johnson or AstraZeneca one-shot vaccine, there's a real danger, of course, in floating the idea that might not be enough. So they are politically motivated in making sure that everybody believes that they're protected enough, even from the new variants with these one-shot vaccines, even as they do admit, well, efficacy of these vaccines has always been at least a little bit lower, just in terms of percentage, but they're both effective vaccines and you can stick with them. But, I do wonder and worry a little bit about how quickly they might admit to the idea that, well, maybe a booster would be a good idea after all, if they think it would make people, either upset about having gotten the vaccine that they got, or I guess probably more to their point, people who have resisted the vaccine to this point, using that as an excuse. Well, why should I rush out and get a vaccine if you're saying that one of the more popular vaccines isn't all that effective anyway, then maybe I don't need it. Well, that still doesn't make any sense, even if it's 60-something, 70-something% effective against the variants. what you're doing is 0% effective against the variants. So, I guess it just doesn't stand up to that kind of scrutiny. But I guess most of you listening already know that. All right. Let's see. Other issues that I thought we might want to take note of this morning, now that we know that the All-Star game is being played this week and not over the weekend, and I guess that probably is the usual way of things, evening game, etc. I can't remember. And even as a kid, when I was more interested in what was going on in the professional baseball leagues, I didn't get to see the All-Star game a lot because I was at camp. I would, in my youth, at a sleepaway camp where there weren't televisions to watch the All-Star game anyway, and even the radios were few and far between. And as 70s kids and television kids, we weren't as interested in listening to a baseball game on the radio. Something we thought our grandparents might be willing to do, but not us. Anyway, so happening this morning, and we can follow along on a Twitter feed of a reporter following developments here. Our good friend and fellow listener Rebecca Romans has forwarded to me, along with some typed laughter, the news that Andrew Feinberg, the reporter for the UK's Independent, is following the sanctions hearing. There's a sanctions hearing going on in a Michigan court. It is, of course, happening remotely, a virtual Michigan courtroom, where the Kraken law team, Sidney Powell, Lynn Wood, and a few other assorted crazies are now, or I don't know whether it's done yet, but this morning were, I guess, facing their sanctions hearing. In other words, the court trying to decide, were their lawsuits and their pleadings in their stupid lawsuits so stupid and fact-free and dangerous that it actually warrants the court imposing sanctions against them. So Feinberg, tweeting from relatively early this morning, about an hour ago, began tweeting, and this is in Michigan, so I mean, you're talking about some early morning stuff in Michigan. Happening now, an hour ago, Sidney Powell, Linwood, and other Kraken lawyers are in a Michigan virtual courtroom for a hearing on whether they should be sanctioned. District Judge Parker, I don't know what the rest of the district judge's name is, but okay, Judge Parker has called the hearing to provide Kraken lawyers, he says, an opportunity to answer questions that she, Judge Parker, deems relevant on whether she should sanction them. Like, should I sanction you? I mean, peripheral questions to that one, of course. She is making clear that she has read all the briefs and doesn't want the lawyers re-arguing what they've written. This is strictly about, I've read what you wrote. Why shouldn't I sanction you for it? It was that bad. I have questions I want to give you the opportunity to answer, Judge Parker says. One of the Kraken lawyers, let's see, I guess a term he's thinking, should we call them meta-Kraken lawyers, I guess, has objected to the court issuing an order to show cause, that is, come in here and show cause why you shouldn't be sanctioned. The assumption is that you will be sanctioned, but you can come in and show cause why I shouldn't do that under Rule 11B of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. One of them is now saying his client, who is one of the lawyers who signed a complaint, was not properly served. And, we've been back and forth over that idea of proper service and a number of similar cases. That's basically, at that point, you're just trying anything to get out of being finding yourself in trouble. I wasn't properly served. No further development on what they're arguing there. The last tweet in this thread, I'll check on his Twitter feed and see if he started over in another thread. The last one saying about an hour ago, Sidney Powell appears to have disappeared from the virtual courtroom. So interesting. And a good comment here to the thread from somebody who identifies themselves on Twitter as Death Cult Tour Guide, but just at Cult Guide in case you're actually trying to find them on Twitter. Oh, and I see a couple other people following the developments there too. So maybe even if Andrew Feinberg hasn't got anything new, we can check in with others. But this was a good comment, I thought. Death Cult Tour Guide saying to Andrew Feinberg here, and Joyanne Reed, who's also following developments, saying, I mean, on the one hand, we should be glad this is happening, that they're finally possibly holding these Kraken lawyers to account. But at the same time, we should be very clear that this, the function of this hearing is, this is a question of, can we manage to professionally sanction lawyers who pushed dangerous lies in an attempt to end democracy? Failure is not really an option here, is what's being said. It's essentially saying, it really should be no question that you can hold these people accountable, but apparently there is a question, and this is their opportunity to address that question, and it really should be an open and shut case, but you never know with these things. And courts don't hand out sanctions lightly, so there's every chance that they'll find a way to avoid sanctioning these people, which, of course, they will take as vindication of their substantive position, which is not a substantive position, really. But they'll pretend that it is. Let's see. A couple of other bits of breaking news. I might as well announce this one. Just happened to have seen this one. Breaking news that Edwin Edwards, the Louisiana governor who served 4 terms, as well as having served 8 years in prison in the interim, in between, I think, is now dead at 93 years of age. He was the king of smooth talkers, says our tweeter here, David Bernard. Pardon me. Among his quotes, the only way I can lose this election is if I'm caught in bed with either a dead girl or a live boy. Is that really? I've heard the quote. He really did say it? Okay, well, he won that election. But there you go. I thought that was, it's certainly newsworthy, the fact that he's passed and that he was, that he's the guy who actually came up with that phrase, which is problematic now. But, everything, it was problematic when he said it. But even more so now for reasons totally unrelated to his own politics. Anyway, let's see. I just happened to see a couple other people talking about the sanctions hearing. Illusory Tenant, one of our good Twitter friends, saying Linwood doing sanctionable conduct at his own sanctionable conduct hearing. So I guess he's been his own regular self and looking to get himself sanctioned on, A, lose his sanctions motion, and B, get sanctioned again. Hank Epton tweeting that Linwood wants the judge to know that he was a coffee boy on the filing that Linwood signed. Don't hold me responsible for it. I had nothing to do with it. He's passing on the tweet of Adam Klasfeld, who is himself a reporter. Let's see. He is a reporter with Law Crime News. We've read their stuff before. What does he have to say? I'm going to go back to he's got an extensive thread on the hearings. I don't think we can, I guess he's been following and live tweeting all along for this whole thing. So I'll scroll back to the beginning of his thread and mark it for reading later on. We'll probably have to wait until the whole thing is over and done with and digested in write-ups tomorrow before we're able to find out what's going on. But let's see, the latest, maybe this thing is over and done with, because it looks like his thread ends about an hour ago too, but it's just this intensive burst of discussion here. Interesting though, here's Linwood saying, in response to Judge Parker, does anyone want to add anything? No answer. Linwood chimes in, I played absolutely no role in the drafting of the complaint. He signed it, but he left the drafting to someone else. Let's see. Judge Parker wants to know what authority authorizes the court to give any of the relief sought. What he's basically asking the Kraken lawyers here is, one of the reasons I want to sanction you is that you brought a complaint that is so weird and wacky that I'm not even sure that there's any authority in law to grant you the relief you were looking for. which would be a huge waste of any court's time and grounds for sanctioning you all by itself, right? You've brought me a nuisance complaint that has, there's just nothing about the way we practice law in this country that could lead anyone to believe that there was something we could even do for you here. So, last chance, tell me, what authority authorizes the court to give any of the relief sought? And one of the attorneys identified here as Campbell answers, the Constitution of the United States. Oh, and Bush v. Gore. So the one-off case that can't be used, by its own terms for precedent for anything. Surprise, once again being used for precedent for something, but this time by a crazy person, or usually by a crazy person, and this too by a crazy person. But again, it's people saying, by what authority? The Constitution. Well, show me in the Constitution where it says that. It doesn't, but it's the secret Constitution. And if you don't believe in it, you're a, communist, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. So basically highlighting the fact that they're all crazy. Unconvinced, Judge Parker presses Campbell for authority for decertifying an election in particular, which is what they were asking for. Campbell claims Bush v. Gore again, conceding that was actually about stopping a vote count. And Parker saying, I don't understand that. That's not a real answer. What else have you got for me? Fink, I don't know who Fink is. It says that the Kraken team ignored, I guess I'm assuming one of the attorneys for the other side here. Fink says the Kraken team ignored centuries of precedent. There was no basis. This court's opinion and order extremely well and properly addressed the weakness of all those claims. And things not getting any better for the Kraken folks. Come on, computer, wake up. It's time for me to play the music for our break, and you're making me late. Okay, 4 seconds late. I'm holding this against you. All right. So not looking good for the Kraken folks here. Fink completing his thought by saying, this was from the beginning to the end an attempt to get a message out that was extrajudicial in nature. Okay, very good. So basically it was just lawyers saying, Constitution says we're right. We can't show you where, but everyone loves the Constitution. If you don't agree with us, you hate the Constitution. Well, that doesn't fly. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. There's more that we can add to the courtroom scene. Our friend and a person with shared interest in the legal system, NYC Southpaw noting as recently as just a few minutes ago, things still going on, and Lynn Wood's extraordinary role in all of this. The last tweet here that I just saw from this thread noting that the court reporter who is, transcribing the hearing has just piped up in court to make a statement, and that's unusual all by itself. The court reporter just piped up to ask Lynn Wood to stop interrupting. It's so bad that the court reporter can't even transcribe what's going on here because they can't shut Lynn Wood up. And Lynn Wood apparently just maintaining essentially, look, you can't sanction me. Wood is ultimately arguing that the Michigan court has no jurisdiction to sanction him, saying, I just didn't have anything to do with this. The defense points out that he cited his involvement in the Michigan case in a Delaware court. Okay. Yeah. So that's not very helpful either. So I guess we're talking about lawyers in opposition to whatever the hell they're doing here. I don't know if I would necessarily describe them as the defense here, but I guess that's what they're doing. All right. That was just a short mini burst of a thread here. What else has he got about Lynn Wood here? I did not review any of the documents with respect to the Michigan complaint. My name was placed on it, he says. The court asks, did you give your permission? And Lynn Wood can only offer, I didn't object to it. I did not know at the time that my name would be included. Can we put your name on it? Did you object to that? Did you give permission to put your name? Well, I didn't object. I'm not objecting to your putting my name on it. I don't know if that means you're going to put it on there or not. Well, why else would they be calling you and asking you? All right. It's just more nonsense, and I guess we can look forward to a more comprehensive and reasoned, or what can we say, a more digested review of what happened in the craziness today. This is very difficult to get a fix on things and what's been happening in the courtroom as it's happening, when it's a hearing about people so crazy that they should be sanctioned by the courts fighting against those sanctions. It's not likely to produce anything that's understandable probably until tomorrow. All right, let's see. Let me dive back into Pocket and the various other things that we've set aside for discussion for today that might be of interest. Let's see. Where are we? Oh, yes. You know what? Here's something I thought I would pick up on. And let me see if I can figure out where this came from ultimately. I mean, I've got the source here, but the question is, where did I get the, let's see. I'm trying to make sure I got, no, not working on this, but okay. Anyway, let me call up the source here because I know we've discussed this before with our Colorado correspondents from the Irreverent Testimony duo. And we've rolled, I think they actually submitted a piece a while back about this, and I haven't heard anything about it since. Where did this go to? From the Colorado Sun, a very interesting and eye-grabbing headline. Jesse Paul is the author to this. Oh, you're not gonna block this for me, are you? Okay. Does this mean I have to sign up for something in order to read this, or just get this damn pop-up out of the way? I guess so. All right, well, we might have to read the Pocket version of this. But let's get to that headline if we can. Oh, dang. Maybe if I reload it, I'll be able to read it again. We're expletive idiots. Something was the expletive. I don't know what the expletive was, but we're expletive idiots. Some Democrats regret Colorado's new redistricting process now that their party is in charge. I am certain that this came up at some point, and I can dig back in the archives. But anyway, I just to find out exactly when we had this discussion, but that's probably not worth as much as reading through this piece. If Y and Z hadn't passed, I don't know if we're talking about, are those like ballot initiatives, Y and Z? Amendments, Y and Z. Okay. Back in 2018 on the ballot. If amendments Y and Z hadn't passed, Democrats would now have nearly unfettered power to draw new congressional districts ahead of the 2022 election and have more say over how legislative districts within the state are drawn. And this happening all over the place, of course, as we face redistricting by Republicans in states where the majority of the legislature is Republican, either naturally or through gerrymandering. But I think you all know the background of all of this. But in Colorado, when this came up, the discussion was, again, about unilateral disarmament. It's a very popular thing, I guess, among certain types of Democrats to say it's true that Republicans are exploitative with this, and when they do partisan redistricting, it's totally unfair, and they gerrymander themselves artificial majorities, and Democrats aren't like that. We're not that terrible, and when we take control, we will give the process over to nonpartisan redistricting or a panel of judges, or they design some sort of system where the redistricting will be done in a nonpartisan fashion. Or you try and create as many competitive districts as possible, as opposed to, protecting your party and creating the most Republican districts you can create, or the most Democratic districts you can create. We'll emphasize competitiveness and bring people in from, essentially they'll gerrymander competitiveness into the thing. And it's like, well, there are certain pockets inside of a state where there's a huge majority of Democratic voters or a huge majority of Republican voters. And it ought to be the case that some coherent representation of the district, how the lines are drawn, with contiguous land mass here, should be, represented by an overwhelmingly Republican or Democratic electorate, and that's okay. And to bring in Republicans by gerrymandering a district such that, it'll get closer to a 50-50 split and be competitive is no more sensible than partisan gerrymandering. And at any rate, I know that we had this issue in Virginia, and we were asked the same question, and I voted against I guess it was I don't know, it was a constitutional amendment. I guess so. I think that's all that there was on our ballots about having nonpartisan redistricting mandated by the state constitution. And I said, we've had this discussion. No, I actually don't think it's a great idea. And I guess the people who it's dawning on now are saying we're expletive idiots about it. In 2018, when Colorado Republicans and Democrats worked together to send amendments Y and Z to voters in an attempt to tamp down the partisanship in the once-in-a-decade redistricting process, the state's political landscape looked a lot different. The GOP controlled the state Senate, a U.S. Senate seat, and the offices of Treasurer, Secretary of State, and Attorney General. Flash forward to today, and Colorado's purple political hue has faded to blue. And now, as new 2022 legislative and congressional maps are being drawn, a number of Democrats are privately, and some publicly, kicking themselves that they allowed the constitutional amendments to advance, ceding redistricting power as the party secured more political control than they've had since 1936. They basically decided to hang themselves for the next 12 years, said Rick Ritter, I guess R-I-D-D-E-R, a Democratic political strategist who has worked on redistricting in Colorado for decades. I voted against it. I thought it was a bad idea. If Y and Z hadn't passed, Democrats would now have nearly unfettered power to draw new congressional districts ahead of the 2022 election and potentially more say over how the updated legislative districts are drawn. The stakes are high. Colorado will get an 8th congressional seat in 2022, and who wins that seat could determine which party controls the U.S. House. Under the old redistricting system, the legislature came up with the congressional boundaries and a commission whose members were appointed by lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. The governor and the Colorado Supreme Court's Chief Justice handled the legislative maps. Amendments Y and Z, which passed by a wide margin in 2018 because they're so fair, instead mandated the formation of 2 independent redistricting commissions, each made up of 12 members, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and 4 unaffiliated voters, chosen by a judicial panel with some input from top Democratic and Republican state lawmakers. The commissions, with the help of nonpartisan legislative staff and public input, will draw the new maps with an emphasis on competitiveness and keeping communities of interest whole. Gerrymandering and protecting incumbents is explicitly not allowed. Politics is about power. That's what it's about. You use it to your benefit, said Ritter. If you've got the fastball and it's going at 105, why do you start throwing a breaking ball to slow the guy's bat down? Well, it's an imperfect analogy, but I get what you mean. You didn't see Randy Johnson and Bob Feller in a tight situation try to throw a breaking ball. No, they threw their 110-mile-an-hour pitch. The first set of congressional and legislative maps released last month were drawn by nonpartisan legislative staff. While it doesn't appear the proposed districts would remove Democrats' majorities, they may shrink the size of the party's power. The preliminary legislative maps also placed a number of rising star Democrats in the legislature in the same districts as other members of their party. For instance, and we don't know any of these people, but maybe you do if you live in Colorado, State Representatives Dylan Roberts of Avon and Julie McCluskey of Dillon would live in the same district, as would Representatives Kyle Mullica of North Glen and Yadira Caraveo of Thornton. Senators Faith Winter of Westminster and Rachel Zenzinger of Arvada were also drawn into the same district, as were Senators Chris Hansen and Robert Rodriguez, both of Denver, which I guess was more likely to happen. But okay, Democratic state lawmakers have been urged by their leadership at the Capitol not to speak to reporters about the preliminary maps, and none talked to the Colorado Sun on the record for the story. But behind the scenes, in caucus group chats, major concerns are brewing. We're, expletive, idiots, said one Democratic state lawmaker who asked to remain anonymous to speak frankly about the situation, and I guess he really did. Morgan Carroll, chair of the Colorado Democratic Party, declined a request to be interviewed for this story, but she hinted at her apparent frustration in a written statement released after the preliminary congressional map was released. This preliminary plan sucks ass. She didn't go that far, but this preliminary plan seems to put a thumb on the scale for Republicans. That seems bad, said Carroll, who was involved in the 2011 redistricting process and ran unsuccessfully in 2016 to represent the 6th Congressional District. But if leading Democrats are unwilling to talk about the redistricting process and their thoughts, those a step away from elected office are voicing concern. I think maps that don't reflect the fact that voters have validated Democratic candidates and Democratic policies are inherently unfair, said Laura Chapin, a Democratic strategist. I am not the least bit interested in a 4-4 congressional split in Colorado that doesn't reflect the will of the voters and helps Republicans win the U.S. House back in 2022. She admits that Democrats were operating under a different political reality in 2018 when Amendments Y and Z were placed on the ballot, and that hindsight is 2020, but there were people warning that Democrats were giving the store away. There were many of us who were appropriately skeptical, and I wish more of us had been listened to at the time, Chapin said. Well, I guess everybody's feeling that now. Senate Majority Leader Steve Fenberg, a Boulder Democrat who sponsored the legislation placing Amendments Y and Z on the ballot, said he thinks some folks have a revisionist history when it comes to how Y and Z came to be. Oh, okay, he's not going to accept any of this. Democrats opted to work on Y and Z, which were referred to voters by a unanimous vote of the legislature, in part because there were other ballot measures on the same subject in the works by Republicans. The GOP-backed measures appeared to have enough momentum to pass, and Democrats felt it was better to be on board and tweak the amendments to make them more favorable than to sit on the sidelines and watch them be voted into law. Y and Z were seen as a fair compromise, including more emphasis on preserving geographic areas and requiring that protections in the Federal Voting Rights Act be incorporated. Now there's no protections left to incorporate, I guess. Kent Thiry, I guess, Thiry, the wealthy former CEO of DaVita, who is an unaffiliated voter, joined the cause and tossed his clout behind the effort. I think it's better that Democrats, Republicans, and unaffiliated folks all were involved in shaping what Y and Z turned out to be, Fenberg said. The ballot measures were celebrated as a potential model for the rest of the country. I guess not now. The fact is that the people of Colorado wanted a fair process, said Greg Brophy, a Republican former state senator. I think the whole country is watching Colorado to see if redistricting can be done in a truly fair, nonpartisan manner, and hopefully we find out if that it can be. Okay, but he admits that given the power to draw the maps on behalf of the GOP in his party's favor, he'd take it. I guess that's the big problem here, is that essentially what's going on then is when Republicans are in control, they take the opportunity to redistrict in their favor. When Democrats are in control, in order to, quote unquote, restore balance, they refuse to draw those lines to their political advantage. And that actually might not be balance. If it's like Republicans can lock in whatever advantage they want for as long as they're able to lock it in, and the Democratic response is going to be, well, at this point, we'll now eliminate the possibility of our locking in political advantage for Democrats and instead be fair and define fair as close to 50-50 as possible. If Republicans, when they're in power, are able to gerrymander things so that it's 60-40 or 70-30 in their favor, and when they lose, it just goes back to 50-50, then, how is that fair? I mean, it's unfortunate, but I guess if you're really talking about being balanced in things, then it almost mandates that Democrats, when they're in control, gerrymander to their political advantage. That's the only way it becomes fair, and let it come out in the wash. If the two sides to this controversy are either we're going to do everything we can to advantage Republicans, or the only other option, we'll do everything we can not to advantage anybody in particular, then there's never a period in which Republicans are the natural losers of, the expressed political will of Democratic voters in the state. That doesn't seem right to me, and maybe not to you either. And there you go. There's, of course, the admission that if we were in charge, I would take that opportunity. Everybody knows I'm a partisan, he said. If I had the power to gerrymander, I'd be happy to do it. But the people of Colorado said they wanted a process that's free of gerrymandering, at least now anyway, by wide margins. It's the commission's duty now to give them that. Senate Minority Leader Chris Holbert, a Douglas County Republican, is another conservative who has lauded Y and Z. He recently said that redistricting this year will be his party's best chance at winning back power. Amendments Y and Z will be the first step toward achieving the Senate majority for Republicans, he told reporters last month. Amanda Gonzalez, who leads Colorado Common Cause, a nonpartisan good government organization that worked on Y and Z, said despite the concerns, the new redistricting process is a big improvement. By taking the process out of the hands of politicians, I'm sure it frustrates some people in power, she said, but I think it's a process that's much more trusted by the average Coloradan. I think that's ultimately a good thing. We'll see. Others who worked on Y and Z are also defending the process. They're also encouraging patience. Might as well read about encouraging patience. What we're seeing now, right now, are preliminary maps, said Democrat Bernie Boucher. I'm hoping I got his name right. A former state representative and Secretary of State who was the leading force behind Y and Z. The process is designed for a significant amount of public comment and reworking of the maps to come up with maps that appropriately represent communities of interest, protect city and county boundaries, and promote the maximum number of competitive districts. I'm confident at the end of the day all those things are going to happen. Yeah, well, me too. It's just that they shouldn't. Boucher said that the commissions and nonpartisan legislative staff are trying their darndest to do the best job they can. But he also said there will be complaints from both political parties. Are they going to be happy? No, because both parties want more safe bets, he said. Curtis Hubbard, a political strategist who worked on Y and Z, also pointed out that there's a lot more work to be done. Anyone who's concerned about whether the maps are fair or unfair has numerous opportunities in the weeks ahead to point out to the commissions and offer up better plans, he said. That's what Y and Z envisions, and that's the purpose of having preliminary plans as a starting point, not a finish line. But Alice Madden, a Democrat and former Colorado House Majority Leader who ran unsuccessfully for the U.S. Senate last year, thinks Y and Z are trying to fix a problem that does not exist. She has a hard time trusting the end product and thinks that partisanship will still be a big part of the maps that are drawn. Just because somebody calls something good government doesn't mean that it is, she said. And I think that's the major point there, right? We like to start out in a vacuum. Well, we would say that doing things fairly and evenly and making it 50-50 in the most competitive districts available sounds like good government. But, taken in the longer game context, will last 10 to 20 years, it's been weighted in favor of Republicans. Now, for the next 10 years, it's not going to be weighted necessarily in the favor of Republicans, but it isn't going to be weighted against them either. How does that balance out as fair? It just doesn't. I mean, that's all there is to it. There's no other way to view it, quite honestly. Okay. Well, I thought that was of some interest, and that maybe you would find it worth your time, and it's certainly credit there to our irreverent duo friends, our irreverent testimony friends who have brought this up in the past. And I think we're very clear on it. I'm trying to find out, is there any way I can look for when this came up? Where's the advanced searches? And let's see if we can find out when. And did we get, was it there was an attached commentary or not? And I don't know how I can track it down from all of the options that I've got. It just, I can't find search terms that narrow things quite enough. But, all right. Well, at any rate, I can search for that offline and see if we can dig up the actual segment or when we last discussed it. I now have to search my own archives in order to do that. But, all right. Well, we'll see if any of this results in any new revelations here. But, man, I just wish I could find the date on it, because I guess it must have been about 2018 when we were considering, or when they were considering all of this in Colorado. But okay, we'll put that aside for now. Got a break coming up, and maybe we can figure it out during the break, and we'll share a couple other stories along the way here. Let's see. Yeah, that might not be the very next thing on the list. Okay. How about this one? We'll share this one. Speaking of both sides and both sidesing the various issues, a interesting entry from over the weekend from Josh Marshall, Josh himself in the editor's blog over at TPM, with this interesting entry: the Virginia GOP, Larry Sabato, and the fall of the House of Both Sides. Very intriguing as well. On Thursday of last week, the chairman of the Republican Party of Virginia asked the University of Virginia, the state's flagship public university, to open an investigation into, of all people, Larry Sabato, Professor Larry Sabato, for allegedly violating the university's Code of Professional Conduct and Ethics with his, quote, bitter partisanship. Now, remember, we're talking about Larry Sabato here, right? UVA responded, telling the Virginia GOP in so many words to STFU. All right. The most obvious but also merited thing to say would be to castigate Rich Anderson, chairman of the Virginia GOP, for his comical level of hypocrisy. After all, this is the party currently defining itself as the party of free speech, right? Trying to muzzle a highly respected senior professor and public commentator over what amounts to a few mean tweets. They're not even that mean. But let's be honest. Hypocrisy is the closest thing the Trump-era GOP has to a defining brand. It doesn't matter that I do it because your side did worse. I'm the victim. Rinse and repeat, blah, blah, blah. But there's something more worth saying about this nonsensical story. Years ago, and in some cases until quite recently, there was a group of commentators who the prestige news shows relied on for nonpartisan, both sides commentary on the politics of the day. Two of the most visible, especially on shows like the News Hour on PBS, were Norm Ornstein and Thomas Mann, two think tank political scientists from the American Enterprise Institute and Brookings, respectively. Another was presidential historian Michael Beschloss. Another was Larry Sabato. Ornstein and Mann tended to focus on the function of Congress. Beschloss, the presidency. Sabato, federal elections. But they each covered the full terrain of contemporary politics. If you go back through 20 plus years of my writing, Josh Marshall's writing, and the editor's blog and elsewhere in TPM, you'll probably find some criticism of each of them, almost certainly precisely because of this studious effort to see the country's two political parties in equal terms and treat them as such, even as the evidence for that perspective steadily dwindled. I think you can see where this is going here. In many ways, TPM was begun right on the heels of the 1988-99 impeachment and the 2000 election, with a sometimes implicit, sometimes explicit argument that the two parties are not simply equal, or rather, simply not equal, as he puts it. They don't function in the same way. Despite its history and current branding, the modern GOP is not just another center-right party of government, such as exists under different labels in every functioning modern democracy. It's something different, and we'll talk about that and the implications for the rest of this story after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. It makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, so no luck finding what I was looking for over the break, but we'll continue on with Josh Marshall's commentary here, just for fun. Talking about the fall of the house of both sidesism, as they were saying. Let's see. Yes, and by the way, Karen commenting here, feels like one party is too evil and the other is too stupid. It does sometimes feel like that. I hate to hang that label on Dems here, but sometimes it just does feel that way. And maybe I should look up. There was a series of tweets. I don't know if I passed them on or not, and I don't think I put them aside because they were just offhand comments from over the weekend, but they might be relevant too. Let me read through the rest of the TPM thing and see if I can decide on whether or not we go with this direction for the balance of the show. But as we were saying here, TPM, as Josh Marshall said, sort of was started with the idea in mind that this both sides approach to everything was, well, incorrect and inapposite to what was going on, that the two parties weren't actually mirror reflections of one another at all. The Republican Party, as he says, is not just another center-right party of government, such as exists under different labels in every functioning modern democracy. It's something different. What is that different thing? It now functions more like one of the revanchist, rightist, sectarian parties, which also exist in most multi-party European democracies. But under the most generous read, they play different roles. The fact that the GOP is substantively the latter, that is to say a rightist sectarian party, while structurally occupying the space of the former center-right party of government, is the essence of the United States' current crisis of democracy. And I think that kind of sums it up. I mean, we've spent a couple of years trying to spit it out in various forms here, but I think that sums it up nicely. It's that the Republican Party wears a disguise to which they're simply not entitled, but which our system of government assumes they will always, this is the role they'll always play, that they'll really just be, generally speaking, representing a center-right view of how government ought to operate, as opposed to this nihilist, revanchist, rightist, sectarian view of to hell with everything. But as long as you're giving us 50% of the power, then fine. And I mean, we are giving them 50% of the power. It doesn't matter necessarily whether Democrats control the House and Senate and presidency, especially if it's narrow. But I guess this issue becomes amplified when the control is narrow. But even when it's not, Democrats say, well, now that we have control of things, it's just like the redistricting problem, right? When Democrats or when Republicans have control of it, they press it to maximum advantage and try to run roughshod over the minority. And then Democrats say this is terrible. You should never do this. This is so bad. Now, this is exactly what Republicans say when they're in the minority. It's terrible. You should never do this. It's unfair, etc. They, though, pledge to, if they take over, run roughshod over Democrats to even things out. Democrats say, well, to show that we're different, when we take over, we're not going to run roughshod over Republicans. We're going to lay out the red carpet for them and insist that everything be a bipartisan compromise. And here we really get to the heart, I think, of what Josh was talking about in that sentence. The problem is that Democrats still say, we still believe that the Republican Party is a center-right party of government, and that therefore it still is a virtue to say that the things that we want to bring to the table and the policies that we want to enact will be bipartisan in nature, and we won't enact them. We even have Democrats who say, I refuse to enact them unless they are bipartisan in nature. But that's because, the old shorthand of things being bipartisan, we gained our understanding of what that means back in the days when Republicans at least were arguably more oriented towards being that center-right party of government, as opposed to the right-wing, revanchist, sectarian, even anti-governmental party. And it doesn't count as for the same sort of thing. It shouldn't hold the same weight to say, well, I insist that our work be bipartisan in nature, when the other party in the bipartisanship is revanchist, rightist, sectarian, particularly if they're anti-government on top of it all. So anyway, I like the way he summarizes things here and saying the fact is that the GOP is substantively the latter, a rightist sectarian party, while structurally occupying the space of the former, because it's reserved for them. I guess really, this is the only thing I can add to all this at this point. That role, that ability to, or that space, occupying the space of the former, is reserved to them by the way we've structured our government, because we structured it in a time when we did have effectively, and it was assumed we always would have two centrist-leaning parties of government in competition with one another over control of that government, but that they would ultimately work together for, if not, work together for the common good. They weren't going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but they had the idea that the government needed to keep functioning. So they occupy a space that's been institutionally reserved for them, I would add. So the fact that they're revanchist, while structurally occupying the space for reserved by law, essentially, for a center-right party of government, is the essence of our big current crisis of democracy. Then, in the spring of 2012, Mann and Ornstein published an op-ed, we talked about it here, in the Washington Post. Greg brought it to our attention. Let's just say it, the Republicans are the problem. The title speaks for itself, but if you wanted more, you could read the book that it was adapted from, the book being It's Even Worse Than It Looks, How the American Constitutional System Collided with the New Politics of Extremism. Ornstein's Twitter feed is now so blistering in its criticism of contemporary conservatism and the GOP that it makes me, Josh Marshall in any case, me blush. Betschloss now has a priceless Twitter feed made up of largely historical artifacts, photos, and commemorations, almost all of which function as subtweets of Trump, Trumpism, or some related manifestation of the contemporary GOP. Sabato, in many ways, back to Larry Sabato, was the final holdout. In an interview with the Richmond Times-Dispatch for an article about the state GOP investigation demand, Sabato chalked the shift up to Trump and the January 6th insurrection. People had better pay attention because if they don't, it's going to happen again, he said. reading over this post, I can see that I might read it as some claim of vindication, or that some might read it as a claim of vindication. And sure, why not? Far from it. Oh, okay. It is more a testament to the Republican Party. It is a good and proper thing to have a mode of commentary that is as free as possible, not only of partisan commitments, but the ideological commitments and opinions which are closely situated to the political contests of the moment. It is useful, but especially in the early 21st century, the Republican Party has simply given people who want to occupy this ground no place to stand. The culture of lying is simply too deep in the fabric. The rejection of democracy itself, let alone the culture of norms in which it best thrives, is too total. And thus, here we are. A little bit, I don't know what. A little flighty in the conclusion there, but I think some strong points made here. The best of which I think to take away is a reminder that we've built the system that automatically reserves a share in power, basically, for both of these two parties on the assumption that they're both going to be basically centrist parties. And the moment one, or both for that matter, of them become non-centrist, and I don't think that's the case with the Democrats, but, you know, it would certainly be as bad, if not worse, if both of the parties to whom all of this power was reserved were in fact extremist parties. But the point here is that the system we've set up for ourselves ceases to operate effectively and maybe at all once one of the parties, just takes one, becomes radicalized. They can undo the whole thing. So, all right, I thought that was a good point and well made, and I wanted to share it with you for that reason. Let's see. Diving into other stories here. This one seems like a reminder of stuff we've heard before, although I thought it maybe put things in a different, or express things differently, but perhaps we'll skip this one for now. But I was thinking of a piece here from The Atlantic. Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt, whose piece was widely cited over the weekend. But I'll give you the headline. The biggest threat to democracy is the GOP stealing the next election. I think I wanted to actually offer that up, not only because you certainly you've heard that by now, but I have my doubts about this. There's a school of thought developing among the commentators that the chief danger of what's going on with the Republicans is the way they're using their power in the various states to set up a legal structure wherein it would, in fact, be arguably legal for them to essentially steal the next election. We've talked about it extensively. It's nothing new here. And I don't disagree that it is a huge, huge problem, and one of the central problems that we face, that they're setting up a legal system whereby they can simply say, well, the current state of the law in our state, you know, we rigged it this way, we made it into this, but, you know, looked at from a neutral viewpoint, we turned to the law books and said, what should we do in the case when a state legislature decides they want to negate the results of a popular election in the state for determining what to do with our electoral votes, and it says that we can do it. Now, we know why it says that we can do it. We made it that way, and we made it that way because we wished that's what it had said in 2020 when Trump lost, and we specifically revised the codes so that we would be able to change the outcome of the election next time, so that we could point to it and say it's all good and legal. You know, we didn't do anything illegal, and we didn't make anything up on the spot. We made it up on the spot last year, but you know, that counts as planning. You know, you can't hold that against us. It's definitely problematic that they're setting up a legal framework in which this can happen. But I guess the thing I wanted to object to was this notion that sometimes accompanies this notion, which is that, oh, there's really not so much of a danger anymore of the crowds returning and attempting a second go at the insurrection/insurgency that took place on January 6th. After all, they did note a lot of discussion over the weekend of the last sections of the additional security fencing erected around the Capitol grounds following the January 6th insurrection, with the idea in mind that when that fencing went up, that they might, in fact, return, because, of course, many of the insurrectionists did, in fact, threaten to return in short order. They haven't. I don't know that that's really any predictor of whether they will or not in the near future. But at any rate, there's a number of commentators who are putting forth this theory that the big threat is legalizing the stealing of the election, which it is. But more than that, that the insurrectionists won't be returning. And that's not something that you really actually need to worry about, and that you really should shift all of your attention to this legalizing of the next steal. And you should. I just don't see any particular benefit to telling people, oh, the physical violence part of it is over and you won't see that again. I mean, certainly if they attempt to overturn the results of the next election, whether that's the midterm elections of 22 or the presidential election of 24, I don't see why they forego the street action violence and military arm, I guess, the paramilitary arm of their party's operations. And that, too, you see in, well, not necessarily in healthy and thriving European democracies, but you do see that all over the world with political movements that have both a political and paramilitary arm. I don't really see why it's necessary to raise, in the task of raising awareness of the legal maneuverings, to de-emphasize, for any reason, the danger of the physical threat of insurrection. Anyway, I just wanted to note that for the record that's happening, and I don't think there's any real basis for drawing that conclusion. It feels nice and comfortable and hopeful to say so, but I see nothing in the world that convinces me that it's not going to be a continuing problem. All right. I also mentioned early in the show, and maybe we can spend the balance of time that we have left here today reading through the Miami Herald's reporting on what happened in Haiti, just because I said that we were going to and we never get around to doing it. Okay, let's see if I can actually clear my throat before doing it, but not do it in your ear by making use of the mute button there. All right, here's what I've got. Again, the Miami Herald, let me see, do I have access to the original here? We will see. Colombians held in Haitian president's assassination. Colombians, by nationality. Held in the assassination claim ties to Miami area security firm. That's troubling. But, of course, that's why it's being covered in the Miami Herald. Who's writing it up? Jacqueline Charles, Kevin Hall, Antonio Maria Delgado, and Bianca Pedro Ocasto are our authors on this piece here. Let's see. The Miami area is looming ever larger as investigators question the men held in the plot to assassinate Haitian President Jovenel Moïse. I hope I've got that better pronunciation going on thanks to Darwin here. 17 Colombians, 17, and 2 Haitian Americans from South Florida are in custody in Haiti. A person who interviewed the detained Colombians in Haiti told the Miami Herald that the men claimed to have been recruited to do work in Haiti by an under-the-radar firm in Doral, which just happens to be where Donald Trump owns a club. I don't know if it's connected at all, called CTU Security. It is run by a Venezuelan emigre, Antonio Manuel, it says, not Emmanuel with two M's, but E-N. Emmanuel Intriago Valera. Antonio Valera, I guess. We can shorten it that way. The Miami Herald visited the company's offices on Thursday, where a doorbell rang to a phone. I guess one of those, newfangled doorbells that can film you as well. And a man declined to discuss the events in Haiti. He did not return phone calls, texts, or emails asking about reports of involvement in the monumental developments gripping Haiti. No one answered on Saturday. Multiple sources in Haiti, requesting anonymity for their safety, have confirmed to the Herald that the detained men said they were hired by CTU, and several of the men indicated they had been in Haiti for at least 3 months, some longer. It is unclear if they knew or believed CTU leaders were aware of the assassination plot. I don't see how they couldn't be, if their claim is right. Anyway, the men were hired... maybe this explains it. The men were hired to provide VIP security, one source in Haiti said, and were paid about $3,000 a month. The two Haitian Americans, previously reported to be James Solages, I guess Solages, 35, and Vincent Joseph, 55, told a judge that they were hired as translators, but did not reveal who their employer was. Judge Clement Noel told the Miami Herald. Solages worked as a maintenance director at a senior living center in Lantana until this past April 12th. Little is known about the other man, but documents obtained Saturday show his name may have been reversed in the Haitian proceedings and that his name is really Joseph Gertond Vincent. Okay, so not Vincent Joseph, but Joseph Vincent. His sparse public footprint shows he was indicted in 1999 for making a false statement on a passport application and given probation. In another Florida-related development, interim Haitian police director Leon Charles, in an interview, said that with the help of Colombian authorities now in Haiti, the investigation is moving fast to get some more groups who played a role as the intellectual authors. Not really even sure what that's supposed to mean. He said the suspects, including the Haitian Americans, confirmed that they worked for a company based in the U.S. and Colombia. They worked with two Haitian Americans and a high-profile doctor here. Those versions square with what family members captured Colombians are now saying. The Colombian station W Radio featured an interview Friday with the wife of captured security man Francisco Uribe, who said he'd been hired by CTU, paid $2,700, and provided travel to the Dominican Republic to work as private security for powerful families. I guess you can believe that would go on all the time there. The Washington Post reported Saturday that Uribe has been under investigation for extrajudicial killings when he was a Colombian soldier. I guess they got the right guy on that one. Also on Saturday, W Radio interviewed Yeni Capador, sister of another Colombian, Duberne Capador Giraldo, who retired from the army in 2019 and was reported killed this past week in Haiti in a police raid. The hypothesis we're all working is that it went wrong and they are unjustly accused of something that my brother did not do, she told the media outlet. He lived with his mother, and we know he was hired to work with a security company. This is not clearing anything up. Intriago's CTU is formally registered as the Counter-Terrorist Unit Federal Academy, LLC. Counter-Terrorist Unit, CTU, and was incorporated in Florida in 2019 under his name, and it has filed annual reports in the 2 successive years. So again, I guess I shortened his name incorrectly, and so he'll be going in this story as Antonio Intriago, as opposed to whichever of the surnames I chose. to shorten his name with. But okay, now we know who we're talking about here. They're incorporated in Florida, been filing their annual reports. It lists a member named Arcangel. How would you even pronounce it? Arcangel Pretel Ortiz. My goodness. Who had run a now defunct security firm of his own called Tactical Consulting Corp. They love the word tactical. This time, though, spelled with a K. Taktical. Not two Ks, just one. Florida licensing records show Intriago is authorized by the state to provide security services and to carry a firearm, but everybody is in Florida. He has little other footprint in public records except for a detainer filed against him in 2011. He has several eviction complaints filed by landlords against his company over the years. Intriago has a website that shows him as a wholesaler and retailer of security equipment. As a representative for big and important security and safety device manufacturers around the world, our objective is to offer first-class personalized products and services to law enforcement and military units, as well as industrial customers, the company says in its About Us section. Known in Venezuelan expat circles in South Florida, Intriago would boast of his police background in the South American country. At times, said one who knew him but did not want to be identified in a widening story, Intriago claimed to have connections to or to have worked directly for U.S. agencies. A person claiming to have known him back in Venezuela said Intriago worked out of a small Doral office where he would boast of being a paid mercenary and a coordinator of special forces. Rawr. But most people did not take those claims seriously. The source, who demanded anonymity to speak freely, said that Intriago is also known for providing firearms, firearms parts, and military and police equipment such as bulletproof vests. Public records link him to a small, fenced, 3-bedroom residence a few blocks off of I-95 near Miami Northwestern High. Venezuela's voter database shows he remains registered to vote there through the consulate in Miami. Intriago's Facebook page provides a bit of a timeline. It shows him appearing to arrive in the United States around 2009 and working initially with alarm systems. But I'm sure they were very tactical alarm systems. His social media presence is largely apolitical, except for some postings against the Venezuelan government and one in support of Juan Guaido. Do I have the pronunciation right? The Venezuelan lawmaker the Trump administration recognized as the oil-rich country's legitimate leader. I remember that. Intriago's security firm has a limited social media presence and does not appear to have won any federal contracts to provide security or training. His personal Facebook page shows that he offers personal security classes at night for people wanting to protect their families and pitches the services occasionally in posts. On Saturday, a Herald reporter and photographer rang the doorbell of CTU's storefront at 2510 Northwest 112th Avenue, tucked in a beige, green, and orange corporate office complex. So fantastic sounding. The store near the Dolphin Mall had a cargo company, a CCTV camera store, a realtor, and a blinds warehouse nearby. So unassuming, we'll say. The office unit had a white garage door in the back and a pickup truck parked out front with the CTU bumper sticker. No one answered the door. A security guard sitting in a golf cart told the Herald that CTU hosts shooting range classes inside, and those classes have people constantly coming and going in and out of the store. She said the company had a class as recently as last Thursday and added the black pickup with the Texas license plates is always parked out front. As one of the company's two other listed locations, the office headquarters on 53rd Street, Herald journalists knocked on the door of the listed suite number inside a white office building with black awnings. We're getting some interesting descriptions here. The suite was identified with a plaque that read Offix, O-F-F-I-X, Solutions, which is owned by someone who appears to be unaffiliated with Intriago. No one answered the door. Intriago and his now ex-wife owned a South Florida newspaper company Prensa Libre Newspaper Corporation, which corporate records show existed between 2003 and 2009. There is nothing in Intriago's public footprint to indicate that he had either the money or the scope to train dozens of private soldiers to raid the private residence of the Haitian president and kill him. What role Miami and Intriago played directly or inadvertently in the Haitian assassination will surely be investigated with the FBI. Haiti has asked for FBI help, in part because of the large number of businessmen and drug gangs that might have had an interest in getting rid of the president. Interesting. A team from Colombia is already in Port-au-Prince, dispatched on Friday to collaborate with the Haitian government. Miami and the Doral Enclave have become a sort of Star Wars bar for would-be liberators and for-hire warriors, another Mos Eisley reference. Wow, a botched coup in May of 2020 in Venezuela similarly involved for-hire security men in Florida, and some of the plotting traced to the 12th fairway of the Red Course at the Doral Resort. It's a Trump place. We only have that to add. Let me hang on. I'll tell you what's up next.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, it's a goddamn mess. That didn't clear anything up, but it did give you some idea of just how ridiculous this story might end up being in the end. Time now, though, to hand things over to Justice Putnam, who will hopefully clear some of this stuff up with his stories from around the country and around the world. So stay tuned for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next. We'll try again tomorrow.